The longtime chief financial officer of the Trump administration, Alan Weisselberg, linked to payments to women who claim to have had sex with President Trump. Weisselberg has been subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury. The, quote, ultimate nightmare scenario for Trump, according to a Trump Organization employee who says that Weisselberg knows, quote, anything and everything about Mr. Trump's finances. The story breaking this afternoon in the Wall Street Journal, coming as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York tightens the screws in the investigation into former Trump fixer Michael Cohen. And it seems a clear sign officials are moving closer to the president's closest inner circle from his old company. Let's bring in CNN's Bryn Gingras. Bryn, in the Trump-Michael Cohen tape that CNN broke earlier this week, the two men, the president and Michael Cohen, discuss Mr. Weisselberg in regards to how to set up a secret payment to keep quiet a former Playboy Playmate of the Year, Karen McDougal.
Yeah, Jake, and that's why his name may sound familiar to you. Jake, Weisselberg is actually the center to the Trump Organization, and he really has been for decades. As CFO, Weisselberg has controlled the movement of money for Trump, and it's clear he has information that investigators want to discuss.
Not right now. I'll be back, though.
Michael Cohen mentioned his name in the secret recording between himself and then candidate Donald Trump.
And I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be...
Listen, what financing?
The Alan that Cohen is referencing is Alan Weisselberg, the financial chief of the Trump Organization, who has now been subpoenaed to testify before a federal grand jury in New York in the criminal investigation of Cohen, according to the Wall Street Journal. The Journal describes him as the most senior person in the organization that's not a Trump, adding that he's handled the president's financial matters for years and, quote, has also been linked to payments made to two women who alleged they had sexual encounters with Mr. Trump.
Replacing George this week is my chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg.
He even once appeared as a judge on Trump's reality show, The Apprentice.
Can we use him anymore?
Oh, yeah.
The recorded conversation by Cohen, just one of more than 100 tapes seized by the government in April as part of the ongoing federal probe into Cohen's business dealings. Sources tell CNN many of the tapes include discussions with reporters and conversations relating to President Trump. Cohen's legal team appears to have released the most significant tape in terms of hearing his conversations with Trump.
I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and spoken to me.
In the recording, the two men are heard discussing a payment to Trump's friend David Pecker, who heads American Media Incorporated, the company that owned the rights to Karen McDougal's story, the woman who alleges a 10-month-long affair with Trump. Attorneys for the president and Cohen don't dispute that part of the tape, but disagree on the method of payment discussed.
We'll have to pay you. So no.
So everyone out there, listen to the tapes. Whatever spin Mr. Giuliani is trying to invent, it says cash, and Michael Cohen says no.
There's no way the president is going to be talking about setting up a corporation and then using cash. Unless you're a complete idiot, and the president's not an idiot.
And so now a question is, will Cohen be heard more by the very public release of that audio? Sources tell CNN Cohen's lawyers didn't tell the Southern District they were releasing the audio, possibly fracturing Cohen's chances of striking a deal with the office that's currently investigating him. Jake?
And he seems to want a deal very much. Bryn Gingras, thank you so much. Let's bring in our experts to chat about this. Ann, I'll start with you. Weisselberg has been with Trump literally for decades. He's the most senior person in the Trump Organization who doesn't have the last name Trump. How potentially dangerous is this for President Trump?
I mean, this is an extraordinary thing. I mean, this is the person who we know has controlled the money, and what prosecutors are doing here really is following the money. And we've got an indication that there were at least two payments that came out of the Trump Organization, and so having the individual who controlled the checkbook essentially is going to be enormously important for the prosecutors, and I think, potentially devastating for the president.
Bakar, if you could take off your Democrat hat for 1 second and just keep on your lawyer hat, what does this say to you about the direction of the investigation into Michael Cohen?
Well, it's definitely wide-ranging, and I think that one of the things that Mueller's doing, the Southern District of New York is doing, is tightening the screws. Regardless of the public display that Cohen is putting on, the fact that he's had the proverbial come to Jesus, that he wants to now be the saint that saves America, that he's releasing the tape, it means that they are breathing down his neck. And Michael Cohen is doing a lot of talking that I wouldn't advise my client to do. I'm surprised that he's out releasing tapes, that his lawyer is speaking so freely, because it looks as if he has a great deal of peril ahead of him. There's following the money, as was said earlier, because that is what investigators do. Usually it's drug dealers and mobsters. When you're talking about cash, here you have the President of the United States and his lawyer talking about cash payments. He's in a world of trouble. I just wish the best for him and his family at this point.
Joseph, the Wall Street Journal also reports that President Trump loves Weisselberg, and one of the reasons is because Weisselberg has been, for decades, really loyal, but it bears mentioning that he once thought that about Michael Cohen as well.
Well, look, I think that what's happening is that the reality that we face is that evidently many times when people step out onto a limb for President Trump, people around him suggest that he take a chainsaw to the branch. I've said it before and I've said it again, that ultimately I think that what we're facing right now is a Michael Cohen who is, as you said, have the screws tightened around him, but at the same time possibly sending off a flare trying to say that, look, I understand that I've been there loyal to you, but that loyalty does not come at an unending pace. And so I think realistically, I think the Trump administration might need to look at ways that they can get engaged on a level that actually makes it easier for individuals who are supportive of the president's agenda to actually remain loyal to him.
And I want to read something to you from this Wall Street Journal article. It says, quote, Mr. Weisselberg didn't know about the payment to Ms. Clifford, who goes professionally by the name Stormy Daniels, when he agreed to a $35,000 monthly retainer for Mr. Cohen, according to a person familiar with Mr. Weisselberg's thinking. So there is somebody, whether it's Weisselberg or somebody in the Weisselberg orbit, saying that he didn't know why he was signing off on this $35,000 a month to Michael Cohen that was ultimately going to help pay for these payments to women. Now, I want you to keep that in mind when you listen to Michael Cohen talking with then candidate Trump about making a payment to Playboy playmate Karen McDougal. Take a listen.
We need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with funding.
So Cohen says, I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set up the whole thing with funding. Do you buy that Weisselberg likely didn't know what this retainer was being paid for?
Of course I don't buy it. Look, I take everything I hear from Trump world as a lie ab initio, because what we have seen from this president and people working for him is that they lie and they lie and they lie. That is the one revealing fact from this tape. You can argue back and forth and debate whether you heard that he was going to pay cash or not. What you can't argue is the fact that the man lied to the American public and had the people working for him lie to the American people. Look, I think this is a nightmare scenario for Donald Trump. He has got two guys who were deeply ingrained in his organization, who handled not only personal issues, but also financial issues and business issues. You have his money man and his fixer, his personal fixer, who are now under legal scrutiny. Michael Cohen under much more than legal scrutiny. You've seen the guy go from, Michael Cohen used to be the guy who'd take a bullet for Donald Trump. Today, he's the guy who sings like a canary to save his own skin. So I think what you've seen in the last few days is that loyalty can turn into self-preservation, very quickly when people feel that the screws are being tightened around their own necks.
And how do you interpret Michael Cohen's behavior? Do you see it more in the context of desperation, or do you think maybe he's just kind of raising his hand and saying, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, Robert Mueller, whoever wants to make a deal, I'm here and I'm ready to make a deal?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, his behavior is not normal in this situation. I mean, as it was said, a lot of people in this situation would just be quiet, right, and be working behind the scenes with the U.S. attorneys in the Southern District to basically try to strike a deal. I think you're right saying that he is looking for a deal. There are challenges with that. I mean, first of all, is he going to provide truthful information? Second of all, who's he going to cooperate against? I mean, here we assume it's the president. Are there other people that he could cooperate against, or is he the person for which the investigation currently has the most evidence? And so there are a lot of pieces, I think, that have to play out. To me, it's particularly dangerous to start releasing tapes like this and having this really public, sort of litigating his case in the public versus having these quieter conversations with the U.S. Attorney's Office if he is thinking about cooperating.
Bakari, you said that you would not be advising Michael Cohen to be doing what he's doing. What would you advise Mr. Weisselberg right now if he has, in fact, as the Wall Street Journal has reported, been subpoenaed to testify? This man did Trump's taxes. He worked for Fred and Donald Trump. He was the treasurer of the Donald J. Trump Foundation, which of course is also under legal trouble for alleged extensive and persistent violations of state and federal law. We're all talking about Michael Cohen wanting a deal. Should Mr. Weisselberg possibly be seeking a deal?
Well, yes, he should be. But I think the first thing that you do is you sit him down and you debrief him yourself. You want to know everything that he knows before he goes into his grand jury testimony. The last thing you want to do as a lawyer is be surprised by your client's testimony. So you'll spend 10 hours, 20 hours debriefing him, understanding the ins and outs of this Trump organization, what he knows, and then you want to get some understanding from the Southern District of the parameters they want to cover. The problem that he has, and by releasing this tape, I mean, what it sounds as if you have money laundering, you have mail fraud, you have wire fraud, and that's before you get to any campaign violations. And so he also is in a world of trouble, but the blessing that he has is that he's very low on the totem pole. It's very easy for him to roll up. They're looking at Michael Cohen. They're probably looking at Donald Trump Jr. They're probably looking at Eric Trump. All of this is presumptuous. And of course, the president of the United States. But he has the ability to roll up. So his exposure is not that great. And the last thing, this is to Anna's point. This is the biggest problem with the Trump administration, Trump org. He has to learn how to tell the truth. He has to be honest, because I remind people all the time, Martha Stewart did not go to jail for insider trading. She went to jail for a 1001 violation, which means that she lied. Do not lie to the federal prosecutors or the grand jury. You'll cause more trouble than it's worth.